The life of an ordinary man changed forever when he was literally followed everywhere by a flock of eagles. When he finally found out the reason behind this, he was struck by the truth and burst into tears. This story began in a small port town on the west coast. Michael Thornton worked as a foreman in a busy seaport. His days passed in the monotonous rhythm of loading and unloading ships. He lived alone in a modest house not far from the port. Every morning Michael woke up at 5:30 to make it to the first shift. His apartment was on the second floor of an old brick building. The bedroom windows overlooked the sea. Michael often woke to the cries of seagulls. The house contained only the bare essentials: a metal bed, a worn-out couch, a small TV, and a simple kitchen area. On the walls hung pictures of ships. Michael had worked at the port for 10 years. Over that time he had learned all the loading procedures by heart. He knew every corner of the pier and remember the names of all the regular ship captains. He was valued for his attentiveness and responsibility. His colleagues respected him for his fairness and straightforwardness. That day, the beginning of October, turned out to be unusually cold. The sea wind cut through to the bone and the sky was covered in gray clouds. Michael put on his old work jacket and took a thermos of hot coffee. Welcome to Spa Stories, where the line between the known and the unknown fades, and the shadows whisper truths untold. Tonight, we delve into the primal connection between humans and animals, a bond forged in trust, sometimes fear, and always in mystery. With him, the air smelled of salt and seaweed. Waves crashed noisily against the concrete blocks of the pier. Upon arriving at work, Michael checked the ship's schedule. First 3 cargo ships were expected that day. He headed to the pier to inspect the mowing equipment. The morning fog was slowly lifting over the water and the sun was just beginning to rise above the horizon. That was when Michael noticed a lone bald eagle on the edge of the pier. The bird sat motionless, like a statue, its snow-white head contrasted with its dark feathers. The eagle appeared exceptionally large. Its sharp gaze was directed at the wall, and its claws gripped the metal edge of the pier tightly. Michael stopped a few meters away from the bird. He had never seen an eagle so close before. In the morning light, the bird's feathers shone with a bronze tint. The eagle turned its head and looked directly at Michael. Their eyes met for several long seconds. Breakfast in his bag, he had a ham sandwich. Slowly, without making any sudden moves, he took it out. The eagle watched his every gesture, its head slightly turning to follow his movements. To Michael's surprise, the bird did not fly away when he carefully placed a piece of meat on the edge of the pier. Instead, the eagle tilted its head to the side. Its amber eyes studied the offered food. Then the bird took a cautious step forward, its claws tapping softly against the concrete. The eagle's movements were smooth and careful. Michael held his breath as the bird approached the meat. With one quick move, it grabbed the food and stepped back, swiftly swallowing the treat before flying away. The next day, the eagle appeared again. To Michael's great surprise, it was in the same spot, even in the same posture, almost as if he had anticipated this meeting. Michael had bought fresh meat from a shop on his way to work. This time, the bird approached him a bit faster, showing more confidence in its movements. Within a few days, Michael's colleagues started noticing his strange behavior. They saw him feeding the eagle every morning. Some thought it was dangerous, while others were intrigued. The shift supervisor warned Michael to be careful, but no one forbade him from feeding the bird. Within a week, the eagle was already taking food directly from Michael's hand. This required absolute trust from both sides. Michael had learned how to hold the meat properly, and the eagle had learned to carefully take the food without touching him with its claws. News of the man who befriended a wild eagle quickly spread through the port dock. Workers began arriving early just to see it with their own eyes. Photos of Michael with the eagle appeared on the bulletin board. Some even began calling him the Eagle Whisperer. One morning, Michael discovered not 1 but 5 eagles. They sat at different levels along the pier. All the birds looked similar, but each had its own distinguishing features. One eagle was noticeably larger than the rest, while another had a small scar on its beak. The eagles not only weren't afraid of Michael, but they also followed him across the entire port. When he entered a building, the birds circled above the roof during ship unloading. The eagles sat on containers watching. They showed no aggression, merely observing. everything around them, the situation, grew more unusual with each passing day. Soon the eagles began appearing near Michael's home, perching on neighboring roofs. Their silhouettes were visible against the sunset sky, and in the mornings they would escort him to work. Flying at a safe distance, Michael's curiosity about the strange behavior of these wild birds grew day by day. He decided to attach a small camera with a GPS tracker. The task was risky, but it was the only way to find out the truth. Using a piece of meat and a few cautious movements, he managed to attach the device to the largest eagle's leg. The data obtained from the tracker showed an astonishing pattern. The eagles flew between the Port Michael's house and an area 15 kilometers outside the city. Their route was precise and repeated almost daily, as if they were following an invisible line. The port management expressed dissatisfaction with the constant presence of the eagles. The birds distracted the workers, and clients complained about their close proximity. Sometimes cargo unloading was delayed because the eagles perched on the containers. The situation demanded immediate resolution. The port director summoned Michael to his office for a short, harsh conversation. Michael was given an ultimatum: either the eagles disappear or he loses his job. He was given 3 days to make a decision. It was a difficult choice. Michael spent a sleepless night contemplating his situation. The eagles had become part of his life, and he felt responsible for them. At the same time, his job was his only source of income, and he couldn't afford to lose it. The next day he came up with a plan. He gathered a few colleagues, and they all took blank firing guns. The plan was simple: create enough noise to scare the birds away. It seemed the only humane solution. The operation began early in the morning. The echo of blank shots spread across the port, and the eagles flew away in panic, their wings slicing through the air as they quickly disappeared over the horizon. After that, the port returned to its usual rhythm, and Michael kept his job, but his heart was uneasy, and he constantly checked the GPS tracker signal. A few days later, the signal led him to a small house on the outskirts of the city. It was an old one-story house with a large garden. The same eagles perched on the trees surrounding the house, looking peaceful, as if they had found a new refuge. Gathering his courage, Michael approached the front door. His hand trembled as he pressed the doorbell. Footsteps sounded behind the door, which opened to reveal a middle-aged woman whose eyes widened upon seeing Michael. The woman turned pale and swayed slightly, but thankfully Michael managed to support her. They went inside. In the living room, photographs hung on the walls. One of the pictures showed a man strikingly similar to Michael feeding the same eagles. The woman introduced herself as Sarah Anderson. Her husband, James, had passed away 2 months ago. He had been a marine biologist who had spent the last 5 years studying eagle behavior. The birds had become part of their lives, visiting the house every day. James's story with the eagles began with the rescue of an injured bird. He had found an eagle with a damaged wing, nursed it back to health, and gradually other eagles joined the healed bird. James kept detailed records on each eagle, their habits, personalities, and food preferences. Each bird was given a name. The biologist spent a lot of time studying their behavior. James's sudden death from a heart attack had left both Sarah and the eagles bewildered. The birds continued to visit the house daily, as if searching for their friend. Sarah could not bring herself to feed them. It reminded her too much of her late husband. When the eagles saw Michael at the port, they recognized traits of James and him. The resemblance was indeed striking: the same facial features, the same posture, even similar movements. The birds began following him just as they once followed James. Sarah proposed an unusual solution: Michael could come over on weekends so that the eagles could keep their connection to James's home while also seeing Michael. This would help everyone, the birds and the people. Their first meeting took place in Sarah's garden. Michael brought fresh meat, and the eagles descended from the trees without fear. Sarah watched with tears in her eyes, as if the past and present had merged into one. Over time, a new tradition developed. Every weekend, Michael would visit Sarah, and they would feed the eagles together. Sarah shared stories about James while Michael spoke about his observations. A true friendship blossomed between them. The eagles no longer appeared at the port. They had come to understand the new order of things. Every weekend they gathered in Sarah's garden, while on weekdays they hunted in the surroundings like ordinary wild birds. Sarah showed Michael her husband's research materials. James's office was filled with hundreds of photos documenting the lives of each eagle he had created, detailed migration maps recording all his observations. The oldest eagle, whom James had named King, was the first bird he had rescued. King had a noticeable scar on his beak and always arrived first and left last among the birds was a pair of young eagles that had joined the group a year ago. Of older birds, the young eagles were more playful and often performed aerial displays over the garden. Sarah gradually transformed the garden, installing special perches for the birds and new feeders in a distant corner. She created a small pond, turning the space into a real bird paradise. Michael helped with the garden arrangements, his port experience proving useful. He reinforced the bird structures, built new feeding platforms, and repaired old perches. Neighbors gradually grew accustomed to the unusual situation, and many came to see the eagles. Children from nearby homes often stood by the fence as Sarah conducted small tours, telling them about the eagles. Each eagle had its own personality. One bird liked to sit on a specific branch of the apple tree, another always waited for its portion last, and a third made a unique call whenever it saw Michael. A year had passed since Michael first met the eagles. Much had changed over that time. Sarah had come out of her grief after her husband's death. Michael found a new purpose in life, and the eagles found a new home in the port. Michael's story became legendary. New workers listened with surprise to tales of the man who had befriended eagles. Though some still doubted the story, Sarah began organizing her husband's notes, planning to publish a book about his bird research. Michael helped with the current observations, and together they continued James's work. One day they found an unfinished article by James about the unusual social behavior of eagles, suggesting that they were capable of forming strong bonds not only with each other but even with humans. King in particular grew attached to Michael, often sitting nearby while Michael worked in the garden. Sometimes the eagle would follow his car to the main road. They shared a special connection. Sarah noticed that young eagles had begun building nests nearby, a rare sight for wild birds. They had chosen tall trees within sight of the house, and their population was naturally growing. Michael and Sarah spent more and more time together, bonding over their shared care for the birds. By the end of the second year, the area around Sarah's house had turned into an unofficial sanctuary, and local authorities took an interest, offering assistance to establish an educational center. Each evening, watching the sunset, Michael reflected on the series of events that had brought him here. One unexpected encounter had changed so many lives. The lone eagle on the pier had sparked an incredible story. Sarah often said that James would be happy to see it all. His dream of creating a place where people and birds could live in harmony had come true, if not in the way he had planned. Now, when someone asked Michael about his unusual story, he simply smiled and invited them to visit and see it for themselves. Here, everyone believed that miracles happen, they only need to be open to them. Remember, the next time you hear the rustle of leaves or feel unseen eyes watching, it could be more than just your imagination.